if he can. So, oh, we're recording, good. So I guess this is the call to order to the September 10th, 2020 meeting of the Easthampton Ranked Choice Voting Ad-Hoc Committee. It's 6 p.m. and I have to read this, which says, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law GLC 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Easthampton Ranked Choice Voting Ad Hoc Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to view this meeting while in progress may do so by connecting via Zoom as described on the meeting agenda. Don't have to make that up anymore because I got a copy of it. All right, so we'll go on to public speak. If there is any member of the public who's here who would like to speak, this is the time. Well, if you're not available now, I don't know what your name is. Feel free to get my attention later and we'll try and carve out a moment. But otherwise we will keep going. Somebody else is here. Oh, it's the Easthampton City Council is joining us. That's nice. Hey, and it's Tom. Hello, Tom, you're muted, but that's okay. So that's exciting. So we have all members of this committee here, which is very nice. For the first time since our first meeting. And we have maybe one member of the public or potentially a robot also. So our next agenda is approval of minutes. So I think it was Tom who took the minutes last time. Do you, we're obviously can't approve them now because it's last minute and no one's seen them yet, but are you gonna be able to have those for us before the next meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Rad. I'm just making sure they didn't get lost or deleted or something. Appreciate that. Okay, so we're skipping that.
I think we have Sarah's minutes to approve though from June 24th.
Right. Did we not approve those last time?
No, because I only emailed them to Barb because.
Got it. Okay. They're very, very nice. I actually, you sent them again, but I saw I had already had a copy, so maybe Barb forwarded them to me or something happened. But in any case,
I can thank my 8th grade history teacher, Mr. Moore, for my excellent note-taking skills.
Thank you, middle school. For those of you who don't know, middle school is something that happened back before everything went to shit. Just kidding. So do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the June 24th meeting?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, abstained?
Oh wait, I'm abstaining. I was not at that meeting.
Okay, great, motion passes. Those are great minutes to look over, by the way. The June 24th meeting minutes. There's a lot of nitty gritty having to do with RCV profile settings in there, so it's just a nice reference for that. Committee secretary position rotation. I will put it out there. Would anyone like to take over the role of committee secretary so we don't rotate anymore? All right, then we're just going to keep rotating. So I think today, is it Chris? Are you doing it today?
Me.
Okay, great. So Chris is our temporary secretary for the meeting, and we'll be taking notes and making the minutes. And I believe our next person is going to be let's see, we have the two people I think who haven't done it yet are Barbara Craig and Owen Zarrett. So since we skipped over Barbara, are you willing or comfortable taking minutes at our next meeting? Oh, you're muted, Barbara, just so you know.
How do I unmute?
Oh, you got it.
Okay, that'll be fine. Next meeting.
Okay.
Next meeting.
Great, awesome. And then I think after that, it'll be Owen. And then we'll figure it out from there. Okay. So next order of business is the LHS provided quotation. I'll just cover this really briefly. You know, Jeff had quoted us $8,000 initial licensing fee plus $800 a year. And I had asked in writing about that, and Jeff had confirmed it shortly after our first meeting. And then I reconfirmed those numbers with Jeff again a month or two later to confirm that whether we had to pay the yearly $800 licensing fee in the first year or not. And he confirmed, no, we do not. So I was kind of surprised to get a quote that showed $8,500 initial fee and then $2,500 monthly fee. So I wrote back to Jeff, and fortunately Jeff was able to get back to me before this meeting in my follow-up about that. And it looks as though there had been some sort of mistake. So my understanding is that Jeff had quoted us for what he said was the discounted price of RTR, which is the results tallying and reporting part of Democracy Suite. Again, I'm not, you're gonna have questions about this because I have questions about this and I don't have the answers to them. But when I wrote back, Jeff sort of was like, oh, I don't know why I gave you those numbers. And I assumed that he was talking about the initial numbers. But then he also said, because I gave you them, I'll honor them too. And he sent a revised invoice that showed the 8,000 and the 800 yearly. Now, I don't know, you know, he didn't say how many years that would apply to or whatever, but it's very nice of him, but I didn't want to, you know, it's not my role unilaterally to decide how to handle that exactly. So I just wanted, I sent out the document. I can screen share it if people want. It's very, very simple. It's just an invoice that we can use for our budget request, but we have two versions of it. The first one shows 8,500, 2,500, and the second one shows 8,000 and 800 for yearly. So do people have any thoughts about this or any comments about this? You don't have
I
to.
remember the 8,000 and the 800 going back to when we did Charter Review Committee in 2018, 19. Chris, you were there for most
Yeah,
of that.
that was the number that we would always been running with.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, truthfully, well, for the first year, it would be just the 8,000 anyway,
Right.
correct?
And he.
Right. No. But I'm saying on his first updated quote, the first year showed 8,500.
500, yeah.
So which was inconsistent, and then it showed 2,500 for subsequent years. So I mean, our two choices here are: we run with the 8,800. It seems like Jeff is amenable to that. That's fine. Or we say, you know, no, we'll pay the quote. You know, it was your mistake, but we're gonna pay the whole thing. So I'm inclined, honestly, since we're not made of money, and that those are numbers that, you know, LHS, you know, Jeff has been fantastic and he's answered all of our questions. He's been really helpful. I really appreciate and respect that. But these are numbers that we have been operating with for a long time, and he's had, you know, it appears at least 3 opportunities prior to giving us the higher numbers to give us the correct numbers. So I'm kind of inclined to just accept his generosity there.
I'm pretty sure we told the voters those numbers as well.
Yeah, I definitely campaigned pretty heavily on those numbers.
Yeah.
So I would move to accept the original and lower quote.
Yeah. I would too. I mean, the question specifically didn't say anything about those numbers, but you're right that like we threw them around. Yeah. Owen.
This is a multi-part question. So, and so I'll ask it all at once. So one is that in what year do we have, what fiscal year do we have to spend the $8,000? And so if it's this year, then obviously I don't believe we would have budgeted for it, but we could theoretically ask the mayor to budget for it if it's the next fiscal year. And so if it's this year, we'll have to request an appropriation, I assume. And then what if for some reason the funding is not granted? I know that's not going to happen, but what if we couldn't get this software for some reason?
So I think I have the answer to both of those, which is since we wouldn't start using RCV until 2021 at the earliest, it would be a request in next year's budget. And then, if there's a delay either due to funding or logistics of software, we can delay implementation at least one election cycle. If in case of emergency, basically. I don't want to do that. I don't think that.
It's not at least one, it's only one.
Correct. Yeah, we can only do it once. We can only delay it once. At which point, I suppose we would be legally mandated to hand count everything if we didn't have software. But I don't see any reason why it would come to that. They're very responsive. So I think Jeff, even if we had a budget hang up, if Jeff was aware that that the money would come, I think he would do everything in his power to help us through. That's just my gut impression from having talked to him a bunch. But I don't see a big problem in any of that happening. I think the city council is aware that we're doing this and is probably aware of the cost of it as well. So I don't see a big problem in the budget going through, but does that answer both of your questions?
Just thinking about contingencies, that's all.
Right, yeah, which is important. Yeah, and if we don't have software, I will volunteer to create processes for us to do it by hand, but it's not going to come to that. But I will do the work involved there, and Tom will help.
Sure.
and I know a bunch of RCV people who would probably be more than thrilled to undertake that kind of a challenge, but we won't.
We're not going there. We're not going there.
We're not going there yet. So, okay. So I don't necessarily think this needs a vote since it's kind of the status quo at the moment, but I think we are pretty well unanimously, it sounds like, as a committee, comfortable accepting the generosity of Jeff's quoted 8,800. Yes, Tom.
Yeah, to add to what you said, I just think that one of the important things that's going to come out of this committee sooner rather than later is going to be just a budget request to the mayor. And I feel like the sooner we get that in, so that we can make it clear that, as we're working through what will likely be a kind of tough budget season, that this is coming. It's something that we're looking at. It could be that we look at the free cash and just decide to fund it out of that and not include it in the budget. Sometimes by the end of the year, we see that there's a little bit of free cash so maybe that'll be it. But I feel like the sooner that we get these numbers to the mayor, the better off we are. And I think that given that, LHS was nice enough to honor their initial numbers, these are the numbers we've been saying now for 2 years. So I think, I feel good about that.
It came back. Sorry, I froze for a minute there. Did everyone freeze?
So
Nope.
it was my thought that we were going to just put this into the budget process for FY21.
For the
include it.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
We spoke at some point about just putting it in the clerk's budget, correct?
Right, under elections.
Under elections, too.
Right.
My only thing is, I just wonder if it wouldn't make sense to just make the mayor aware of the situation prior to, enough prior to that if what happens, some of the stuff that we're seeing from the city council, paints kind of a complicated picture of what COVID has done to finances. It really hurts some things, but not others, so I think that, there's a possibility that we could be in a situation where the free cash like maybe not, probably not, but there might be some money, and it might just end up being the mayor might decide that it's easier to just fund it out of that rather than bring it through the budgetary process. Just do a supplemental appropriation. So I just think that, like, let's just get that information to her, and then she can decide how to handle it.
Anyone, how do we do that?
I would just write her a memo and just
Yeah.
tell her what the situation is and have her give us some guidance on how she wants to proceed.
So we can do that immediately. So I have the invoice, and I was hoping that after this meeting, the next step would be either submitting a budget request or a letter to the mayor, or however, whatever we decide is the next step. We have all the information we need, and so I can just go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Am I hearing that probably the best next step there is for me to just send a letter to the mayor, including that invoice, saying, hey, what do you think we should do next with this in terms of
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, great. Then I'm gonna do that right after this meeting. I'll email her and let her know, and we'll see we'll just go from there. The one other thing that I would add is that question 2 is on the ballot in less than 2 months, and if it passes, we will likely receive some state money for implementing RCV. Now that implementation would be for state races, but because we do those on the same ballot, that would probably cover, some of that would probably cover our license payments to LHS. I don't know.
Do it on the same ballot for municipal.
Oh, it's not on the same ballot. It's a
No.
separate, okay.
We're
But it's the same
But it will
process.
require the same software.
It will require the same software. So any state,
I don't
Any-
think so. Because I think the state's going to be doing the ranking. So who knows? I don't think that
the state will be doing the ranking, but the machine still has to read the RCV ballots. So
I would say that's probably just going to be an upgrade that LHS is going to do for all, they're going to do for all their customers because they'll have to.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, and then we have hand count people too, so.
We'll see. I mean, that's a best case scenario where some of the state funds that come through from that end up helping with our yearly costs. But
In which case, we just don't spend that money.
oh, exactly. It would
Budget
well,
for
would
it,
be-
and then
yeah,
just
yeah,
sits in an account and gets transferred to somewhere
yeah.
else.
No, it's only a bonus. So, in the worst case is the same as it is now. So, and the question may not pass, so it might be moot. So.
I think your statement, the worst case is the same as it is now, applies to all 2020.
Yeah, we're living through that at the moment. No, you know what? Honestly, things could always get worse. So
It's true.
Yes, if this year has proved anything.
yeah, let's not poke the bear.
Sounds like a dare.
Yeah, I know. It really does. All right. So, you know what, I'm going to interject here to just raise the question, does anyone have new business that they're going to want to bring up or introduce at the end of this meeting? Okay, so I just wanted to schedule that in if it was a thing. So the next step is the ordinance process. The good news here is that Tom and I did some offline work on this. I'm going to screen share what we have now, preview ordinance. Okay. Does everyone see? I'm going to try and make it like screen size.
That's good.
I know it seems like on Zoom, everybody, when they screen share, goes like this. It's like a tiny rectangle and a weird size rectangle. Okay, does that work for everybody?
Yep.
Okay, so so Tom and I went through this. So what we basically have here is 4 sections constituting the first 4 sections of the ordinance. Now this isn't what we imagine to be the ordinance in its totality, but it's kind of the meat of it. And you know what? Before we look at this, I'm just going to quickly acknowledge the next steps that we see. We're going to go over those after we look at this, but just to kind of head off questions of like, oh, maybe we need this, maybe we need that, in case we've already done them. So, so I'm just going to quickly read over these and we'll discuss them more in a minute. But the next steps for this involve some details about how the results are reported, and like what numbers are reported and in what form that happens. Recounts is something that we will need to talk about more. So that will probably come up in this discussion, but just know that it's something that we are aware is a bit of a gap, which, you know, so anyway, recounts and what language we may or may not need for that. Another big part of this is voter education materials, which is not part of this ordinance at the moment at all. But we'll talk more about that. Also, some write-in clarification. We will need a little bit more in terms of write-ins, and we can discuss that going through. And then we'll get to this obviously as we go through the ordinance, but a summary in plain English of the configuration settings. That's something that we'll talk about too. So I just wanted to throw those out there in case that helps. But what I would like to do with the committee, this is 3 pages, 2.5 pages, is go through this as a committee and make any notes about adjustments that could happen, because I think this is in a position where it could be sort of a pre-final draft. I don't think we're necessarily, I wouldn't call this rough anymore since it's been looked over and edited quite a bit. So I'm gonna just read through it section by section and kind of paragraph by paragraph, and I can see everyone. So you know, either jump in or do a hand raise if you have a question or a comment or a thought or anything, and we will break and we'll talk about it. Does that sound like a good plan for everybody? I'm making this up as I go. So, okay. So section 1 is definitions. So I had initially brought up the idea of using concluded ballot instead of exhausted ballot, but in the literature of ranked choice voting and the software, it's almost exclusively referred to as an exhausted ballot. So I'm just going to keep rolling with that, with exhausted ballot, because pretty much everyone knows what it means. And if people who are against RCV want to complain about it with that word, they're welcome to do so. But it's just kind of the de facto word. So I decided to stick with that. So we have a continuing ballot, means a ballot that is not an exhausted ballot. Continuing.
To nitpick right off the bat, for clarity's sake, I don't love the idea of defining something that relies on a definition that's 2 lines down.
Okay.
I just think if we're trying to be clear, that's not exactly the clearest we could be. Maybe
Right.
we just exchange numbers 1 and 3. Maybe we just move them.
Well, if we exchange numbers 1 and 3, we also have to exchange number 2, because number 3 references something in number 2, which is fine. These currently are in alphabetical order.
I just noticed that.
Which they don't have to be. So I like the idea of rearranging them based on logic as opposed to alphabet, because it makes
alphabet is just fine.
Owen?
I think it could go either way. I mean, Sarah raises a good point about kind of logic. I think a lot of our current ordinances, the definitions are in alphabetical order, I believe, but I'm not 100% sure. But I mean, Sarah does raise a good point that you need to understand one concept that precedes the other. So I'm not sure.
I just think that a lot of this is technical, and confusing. And because it's important that people understand what's happening with the way that they're voting,
yeah,
I think we should consider that.
Yep. I agree that we should reorder them based on logic as opposed to alphabetical. Since there's only few, I mean, there's only 7 of them, and we can add more if people, if anyone feels like something should be added. The definitions, it's just nice. They're not super, super necessary, but a lot of ordinances have them, and I do think that it's a nice way into this. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think to that point though, we should always keep readability for the voters top of mind.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to start then by saying continuing candidate means a candidate who has not been defeated. An exhausted ballot means a ballot that does not contain a highest ranked continuing candidate. And a continuing ballot means a ballot that is not an exhausted ballot. Wow, what a logical order.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to, if we're going to change the order, you're right, that we do have to figure out how they relate to each other.
Yeah, well, and for these ones, it'll be 2, then 3, then 1. So then an overvote means the voter marked more than one candidate for the same ranking. Ranking means, was that a hand, Barbara, or hair?
Oh, no, no.
Okay. Sorry. Ranking means the number or the numeric position assigned on a ballot by a voter to a candidate to express the voter's preference for that candidate. Ranking number 1 is the highest ranking, ranking number 2 is the next highest ranking, and so on.
So if we're following that logic, we might want to bump ranking up.
Ranking first,
Over
yeah.
down, overvote down.
Yep. Yep, so sort of we're going like 5, 4, 2, 1, 3.
Perhaps.
So round means an instance of the sequential instant runoff tabulation process as described in section 4 of this ordinance.
For readability, that rankles.
A little bit, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I understand we're going to have some technical language in here, but I think we should at least consider. Yeah.
So do you think that if we added a definition for instant runoff, it would help in terms of this definition of what a round is? Because this is the first time that the words instant runoff appear.
I think that's not a bad idea.
Okay, I'd like to do that too. And it can be brief because these are all brief.
I think it's good that they're brief. I think you guys succeeded well at that.
And then finally, skipped ranking means the voter left one or more rankings blank, but then ranked a candidate at a subsequent lower ranking. Pretty straightforward. All right, before we move on, we're going to add a definition for instant runoff, and we're going to reorder these based on the logic of what references what. All right, I'm going to move on. This is a very short section. Section 2, applicability. Municipal elections for mayor and for each district city council representative shall be determined by the ranked choice voting process described in this ordinance when there are 2 or more candidates listed on the ballot for that office. So this is something that Tom and I discussed some, and I've discussed with some other members a bit, because we initially were sort of talking about
Did Dan freeze? Did I freeze?
Can't see him anymore.
I see him, but he's not talking.
clerk before the candidate filing deadline.
Dan, you disappeared for a while. If you could start over.
Oh gosh. Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me
We were
now?
just introducing section 2.
Okay.
That, yeah, you said you and Tom talked a bit about it and then you stopped.
All right. Cool. Well, what was that about? It could always get worse. Sorry for the internet. if you want to see the internet get better, come to our next broadband committee meeting. All right, so to reiterate that, I will say, we had talked about when ranked choice voting would be used. And if you look at the act that was passed, it does talk about using it when there are two or more candidates. So there had been some discussion about RCV only being used with 3 or more candidates, or when there was a declared write-in, which is how some municipalities do this. Tom and I, having discussed this, basically decided that was overcomplicating it, and I kind of slept on it, and also came to my own personal belief that we should simply use it when there are 2 or more candidates, period. I think that's going to be more consistent to voters. It's not going to introduce a new process for the clerk, which would involve a letter coming in saying I am a declared write-in, etc. It simplifies everything. It makes it more consistent. And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to have a 2-person race with RCV on there with a write-in. At first, I was sort of hesitant to have that be voters' first impression of RCV was 2 people and a write-in. But I actually sort of came to the conclusion that I thought that would not be bad, because you see the 1, 2, 3 there, and it's actually quite clear. So, so anyway, that was the thinking behind this. It's also, I don't know if it cut off before I said this, but our question that passed and the act that was passed does basically specify using RCV when there's 2 or more.
Yeah,
so
it says it shall only apply on a ballot on which there are not less than 2 candidates.
Right. Which means not less than 2, just means 1. It's funny that it's written that way, but
There's half a candidate.
that's true. Yep, there could be. I don't know what that would be, but so, and regular plurality voting shall be used when fewer than 2 candidates are listed on the ballot for that office. So again, half a candidate.
Is plurality something that people will need a definition of, or because it's not our focus?
It's not a bad idea.
I mean, we don't want to, I don't know. I don't think we need to overcomplicate the definitions. I just have a question. You know,
No, I think a lot of people don't know what plurality means.
But
So-
by you saying regular plurality, I think it makes it, I think it's clear, but.
Okay.
Or maybe we could just say like voting. I would need to check on this, but you know, when it
Majority?
comes, because the only thing that's left is, well, yeah, actually, never mind.
Oh, sorry, Tom.
No, it's whatever.
Can I suggest that we actually strike that? Because let's just visualize the scenario in which there are no city councilors running for a precinct at all, right? I suppose that could happen. Then we're going to have a situation where people are going to be writing in candidates, and it's almost certainly going to have to use ranked choice voting.
No,
But it will.
Usually when there's nobody running, I mean, you end up with, you know, just a smattering or maybe somebody that comes forward, but.
And can the software even rank more than one?
Yeah,
Right.
and they're
Yeah.
not going to write
The
it.
software can handle more than 1 write-in line if we want it to. Owen?
I was just going to say that I agree with Sarah that if we're using any novel language that doesn't typically appear anywhere else, we might want to consider placing in the definitions, especially when the concept of a plurality in voting is kind of part of the foundation of understanding the mechanisms behind ranked choice voting. So I would at least encourage the group to consider any terminology around which the ranked choice voting is based. And in some cases, someone's understanding of what a plurality is might be different as it's applied to ranked choice voting too, although probably not. But I would support what Sarah said. I think it might be something for the group to consider.
And to reiterate, is that adding a definition for plurality? Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally support that. I think that would be a really good idea.
Before we move on from this section, I actually have another question that I'm not sure where the charter is now because of the very drawn out nature of the process. But we discussed a lot about district council seats versus what did we end up calling them? Precincts. So I don't know whether we've landed on precinct or district, but we'll.
I think it's going to be precinct if it passes.
Okay, but we're not there yet. All right.
Not there yet, no.
Okie doke. Thank you.
Okay, so it should be district at the moment?
At the moment, it is correct.
Okay. I don't mind if we're adding a definition for, oh no, because I don't know if we say majority anywhere in here. Most people know what majority means too anyway. I like the idea actually of getting rid of the word regular because I feel like it kind of confuses. I don't know, it creates a distinction between regular and irregular.
If you have a definition for plurality, you probably don't need regular.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can just say plurality voting shall be used.
Here's another definitional nitpick. If you have fewer than two, do you need to say plurality or can you say majority? Or is that
well
that you're going to be stepping in at some point? I don't know.
I think plurality means whoever gets the most votes,
Right.
which sometimes can be majority, but not always.
Well, yeah, I'm aware of that, but I'm saying right, it's situational. If there's fewer than two candidates, is that person automatically going to have a majority? I don't know.
No, because there could be two write-ins. There could be two write-ins that get enough to.
All right.
Theoretically. Is there a better word than plurality? I mean, there's first past the post, which is sort of the colloquial term. I don't really want to use that, but is there a better word for the pick one and don't have a runoff system other than those two that I'm totally forgetting? Because plurality voting is like kind of how I think about that.
We can just use the term non-ranked voting or non-ranked choice.
Non-ranked. Yeah.
Though I still am concerned of a situation where we have three write-ins when no one's running for an office. I would hate to see that happen, and then we go with the plurality after all this.
Well, just throwing it out there, and I hate to introduce new concepts here, but do you think that, like, would it be, I mean, this would be something we'd have to run by the city attorney to make sure that it works, but do you think we could put in a section in applicability and saying, like, that the city clerk has the ability to use ranked choice voting in races with less than with less than two candidates listed on the office, if they feel that there will be a large number of, like, substantial write-in, if they have reason to believe that there will be, like, substantial write-in candidates.
I like your thinking on this, but I don't want it to be based on feeling or discretion. I want it to be based on.
So I guess if this ordinance, I mean, if the question that the voters passed said that ranked choice voting would be used when there's, what was it, two or more, it was
Yeah.
I'd have to look at the ordinance again. But the ordinance might already answer this question, which we might have to use ranked choice voting in this situation.
The act?
The act, yeah.
The act, I'm sorry.
I'm looking at it right
So
now.
what it says is ranked choice voting shall only apply to a ballot on which there are not less than two candidates.
Yeah.
So actually, that's pretty clear. Shall only apply to a ballot on which there are not less than two candidates. So I don't think we can actually
That's
use
fair.
it. Based on how this is written, I don't think we can use it if there's less than two.
Yeah, don't overthink it. Make it as simple, you know. There could be, I mean, it's very unlikely, and if the act doesn't specify it, I think you just need to go with how the act reads.
Well, in this case, I think the act does specify it in that
It does.
I think it prevents us from using RCV if
I
there are
agree.
two candidates.
You're right.
Um,
You're right,
even
you're
if
right.
I'm Tom, I'm kind of with you in spirit, but in this
Yeah.
case, I think
Yeah.
it.
No, I
kind of-
think you're probably right there.
and we can amend it. I mean, the act can be amended, but for the time being, I think this is what we've got to do.
Yeah. It does bring up the interesting question, though, of like, say that Precinct 3 Councilor Tom Peake running totally unopposed, and then like, the day after the deadline, I am hit by a bus and killed.
Yep.
And 7 people declare as write-in candidates.
Yep.
That's exactly what I'm worried about. But
Then
But
we'll
now I
just
think our
do it
hands are
like we
tied.
do it now.
I agree.
Yeah.
We would just do it like we do it now, and it wouldn't be the end of the world.
And the
That would be
worst
for sure
person in
Tom.
all of Precinct 3 gets elected with 20% of the vote.
Well, there you go. It's
And that'll be a good impetus to change the language, to
Chris, you're
really.
in precinct 3, right?
Am I the worst person?
Maybe you could be. Ask your kids.
All right, Owen.
Just want to say quickly that I would imagine somehow Tom in his spectral form would prevent that outcome from happening, but that's just my quick input.
The ghost of Tom steps in. All right, I'm going to move on to section 3. This one's pretty short. So I based prior to or since our first draft of this, I removed a lot here. I basically removed everything that I felt like was just flowery language that didn't mean anything. If something said like shall or shall not or may or there was stuff that was just sort of like, it didn't need to be here. So it's very short now. So the city clerk has the sole authority to determine the design of ballots containing ranked choice voting contests. Very simple.
I like that.
Yeah, just gives the authority of that to a single office. Ranked choice contests will be grouped together on the ballot, and specific voting instructions will be presented above or next to the first ranked choice contest. The ballot will be designed in a manner that allows voters to rank as many candidates as they wish, up to and including all listed candidates, and at least one write-in candidate. If the ballot design software, the overall size or shape of the ballot, the tabulation machines, or any other associated election hardware or software would prevent the ballot from allowing voters to rank all candidates, the city council may vote to authorize the city clerk to reasonably limit the number of rankings on a case-by-case basis. So this is to deal with the Cambridge situation, where there have been times where it's a different thing because they're doing multi-seat sometimes, but they have had situations where they have 19 or 22 people running, and they did not have physical room to put more than 15 rankings. And so they did limit it. And I think recently they actually reduced it to 15. I think it had been more prior to that. But I added in the case by case and the city council because this is sort of it's not exactly discretion, but it's a weird situation and I like the idea of multiple people being involved in sort of doing an override. Owen?
So can you just, what would this look like in practice? I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
Sure. So imagine that there are 13 people running for a seat, right? We may be able to fit 13 columns onto the ballot in order for voters to rank all 13 of those people. But now imagine there's 20 people running for that one seat. Again, this in Easthampton for a single seat, very, very unlikely, but this isn't completely hypothetical because this does happen in some places. it's possible that the software, the ballot layout software, the machines that read these ballots, does not support or fit that many columns. Let's say it can only do 15, for example, which is again based on a real situation with the same vendor. In that case, the city council will be able to vote and say, we are comfortable in this race limiting rankings to the maximum that the machine can do. So all the candidates would still appear on the ballot, but you would not be able to rank all of them. You would only be able to rank up to X number, which was probably 15 or 10 or something like that. Barbara?
So I see a problem in this, in that the last day, we are set by guidelines as far as when the deadline for nomination papers is, and then there's a couple days to allow for withdrawal, and then we go into, pulling the order and all that kind of thing. And then I usually have to get it, I usually send it to the LHS like that night, because we have, the time period that we have between the deadline for withdrawal and when I have to get those ballots is literally, there would not be time for the city council to have a meeting and think about it and talk about it. There's just, by the beginning of October, that's when the deadline is. And then I have to get my absentee ballots. So I don't think there would be time for the city council to get together and vote to authorize me to do this. So I don't think that's going to work. There's this timeline wise, there's not enough time.
So this was me being extra cautious, but I don't actually think that this is a bad thing for the city clerk to have discretion over, because it's not really discretion. It's responding to the situation on the ground, which is we can only rank X number. I want this ordinance to be able to apply to any I want it to be software agnostic, hardware agnostic. However, we are dealing with specific software that does sometimes, and hardware that does sometimes have these limitations. So I am comfortable putting the authority of limiting this in the hands of the city clerk solely.
Can we, I have
I
no
want
problem.
other people to agree on that before we obviously.
I don't have a problem with that either, but can we put some sort of safeguard in case we get a bad city clerk in the future who hates RCV and say, but no less than 10?
Right.
Yeah. Tom?
What if we just change it to say that the city clerk can limit it to the maximum allowable?
So Chris brings up a good point, which is a problem with that is that if we did get a city clerk that really disliked ranked choice voting, then it's possible, since they might have some authority to replace the hardware, replace the software, get a different vendor, etc. They could theoretically go with a vendor that didn't support ranked choice voting at all, and say, oh, the ordinance allows us to use different hardware because it can't support it, we can't use it. Even though we have to use it, I'm using this clause to say that it's not supported. And I don't think that's a ridiculous idea. So I like the idea of specifying a minimum. What do you guys think a good minimum would be? 10?
Yeah, no less than 10.
No less than 10?
Do we know how much the LHS, how far out they can rank? Do you know what our,
since they do Cambridge's elections, I'm almost positive they can do at least 15.
But isn't Cambridge has kind of got their own software though, and we're not going to be using the same software that Cambridge is using.
So Cambridge has its own tabulation software. However, they use ICP, they use Dominion's ICP machines.
Right.
And they use a similar, ballot creation software. So they use a different tabulation software, although they actually do use Dominion's RTR, the Democracy Suite RTR, to process that, and then it outputs in a special format to go to the other software for tabulation, because that's in their process. So you're right in that they do some things uniquely, but the good news is that they are the same vendor, and a lot of the hardware and software is the same. At least in certain steps, like the casting of ballots and the ballot design. So,
I actually remember when I went to the Unrigged Summit in Nashville, and we ended up hearing a presentation from the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. They said that in places like Minneapolis, where you have mayoral races with just a totally insane number of people running using ranked choice voting, most people want the option to rank 7 or 8. And after that, they feel like they've done their part.
Yep.
So 10 to me seems cautious. It seems fine.
Yep. Yeah, and they, studies that have been done have found that about 95% of people get one of their top 3 choices in RCV elections. So it is diminishing returns, but you want to have you want to give people the freedom there. Owen?
All right, maybe I'm not understanding correctly, but what if we stipulate 10 and for whatever reason the ballot design doesn't allow for 10 columns?
If that would be the case, then we would have to, if we specified this, then we'd have to use different software or different vendor or something. At least in my mind.
So you're saying that we because of the way that we're writing the ordinance, we're in violation of the ordinance by utilizing software that would not allow us to carry out the city ordinance, right? So
right.
Have to select software. I'm fine with that. Just thinking of contingencies.
Yeah, right.
Maybe you could just leave that whole last sentence off, and just, whatever the software allows, that would be what it is, and just stop after write-in candidate.
I mean, I like
Yeah, I mean, the reason I want to put a minimum in, and as I said before, is I don't think this is totally likely, but I see plenty of examples in government of people who are leading departments at state, local, and federal levels who are antithetical to a lot of the in-spirit things of what those departments do. And given the amount of opposition to ranked choice voting that exists in Easthampton, which I don't think a lot of it is passionate, but I do think there are some people who do not like it. The idea of somehow there being a clerk who is very much wants to undermine it, I can see a difficulty if we don't specify some minimum of them being able to sort of weasel through our hardware doesn't support it. So,
but your sentence up on the top says up to and including all listed candidates. So, I mean, so you'd have to at least try to, I don't know. Up to and including all listed candidates, and at least one write-in.
But if we get rid of that, so you're saying just leave it at that? But if we get into a situation where we do have 25 candidates, then we've got no contingency if we can't fit them in.
If that ever happens in Easthampton, I'd be really surprised.
Me too. Me too.
Really. I mean, for these 2 races, but.
Oh.
But so Owen, your concern about tying our hands by having a minimum that can't be met is valid, but I don't think I can't envision a situation in which we can't fit 10 columns.
Yeah, I mean, the current software has accommodated races in other places with more people than that. So we should be good. I guess the one thing about it is what it would mean is that, like, if there was ever an attempt by anyone within government to switch out to a different system that wouldn't accommodate that, they would be in violation of this ordinance.
Well, then they couldn't do that, right?
Correct.
Right.
Which is good.
Right. No, yeah.
If we specify a minimum. If we don't specify a minimum, then they theoretically could switch out.
So I guess the question is there any situation in which this LHS software can't handle 10? I mean, maybe a really long name. Is there any? No, right? Because we could just use 2 lines or 3 lines for the name.
I'm curious though, does the applicability section maybe obviate a little bit of this? Because municipal elections for mayor and for each district city councilor shall be determined by ranked choice voting process described in this ordinance.
I mean, yes, the problem there is that someone could theoretically arrange someone to be running an election using a hardware software or neither system that only allows ranking of up to 2. And then they could say, yep, we're using ranked choice voting and you can rank up to 2. And then you're not using ranked choice voting anymore. It's just, I mean, we could say not less than 3. We could say not less than 5, you know, that would I would be satisfied with that. Owen?
Well, Dan, you've reviewed, I don't have them in front of me, but you had some other ordinances from other localities. Is this addressed? Is there precedent for this at all where this kind of language is addressed elsewhere?
There was. I did see things that talked about limiting it based on hardware and software. And obviously the biggest precedent for this is Cambridge, where it was news there within the last year or two that they limited it to 15, I think. I could be wrong on that number, but their council did change it to limit it because of hardware issues.
Do you know?
So are people? Oh, go ahead, Barbara.
You know what the wording is that Cambridge did to limit the?
I don't. Let's see. I might
be looking at to see how they phrased that.
And do you need to stipulate the order in which the candidates submit all of their necessary forms?
That's already determined by the charter.
Okay.
Yep.
And I believe the order of candidates on the ballot is already determined by existing.
By draw. It's by.
Okay.
Yeah. And that would apply to this exactly the same way.
Okay. I have a question though. So it says the act says each voter shall cast a single vote by ranking candidates in order of preference, indicating the voter's first choice, second choice, third choice, and continuing until the voter has assigned a single numerical ranking to each candidate on the ballot or until the voter chooses to stop ranking. So that doesn't seem like it would allow for somebody to jam the process by only allowing to rank 2.
Yeah. So my main concern here is that I do think that's pretty clear, but so basically I see this in the ordinance as adding a reasonable restriction onto what the act says based on unlikely scenarios that could, you know, I don't think they're so unlikely that they're impossible because they have happened in other cities. So this is adding a restriction that I think is practical for practical reasons. And I don't want that restriction to be an excuse to be used in a way that is undermining. So I agree with you that the act kind of does specify this clearly that it kind of shall be used for all rankings, but I think that we need this reasonable limitation added, which I think would be probably legal. Again, that's probably a question for a lawyer, but I think reasonable limits based on the reality of implementing a law are fine. And so I think that's sort of the rationale for why this is here.
If it turns out that that's not legal, that might actually be around the time that we think about going back to the legislature for a couple technical fixes and just saying, hey, we're implementing this and we realize there's these like 5 weird edge cases where something might be a little different. So you just amend that special act and just hope that they don't put that back on the ballot because that would work.
I doubt that would be necessary for something like this, but that is always sort of the fallback. Owen, did you have a hand up?
I was just going to say that I think just anecdotally, a lot of times when the attorney reviews these ordinances, they're going to pick up on some of this wording and potentially pick out if the wording is crafted in such a way that kind of creates a pitfall, like some of the pitfalls we've been talking about here. So there's that as well. But that's just my personal experience.
Yeah, I would assume that as well, even though I don't have experience doing it. Chris?
So, I mean, I guess it seems that we've spoken a lot about this. Is anyone like really opposed to it? We might have a situation like Owen said, where the lawyer might say we can't do that. But I would suggest we run with 10 and move on unless anyone really hates 10.
Yeah, except I would not want the city council to have to vote, no matter.
No,
I agree.
I agree too. I agree too. I actually already wrote down a note to remove that bit.
Okay.
All right, Tom?
Yeah, I guess then the one thing is that I would want it to say not just 10, but like as many as possible and no fewer than 10.
Yep.
Yep.
Like if 12 is doable, then they should do 12, even if
That's a good point.
I
they shouldn't
agree.
just automatically fall back to 10 if they can't do
15, right. No, I definitely agree that it should say something about the maximum number possible and no less than.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to move on. This one is this is the big one. So section 4 tabulation, and just chime in or stop me or whatever at any point on this. After the polls close on election day, election officials in each polling location will tally the ballots either by hand count or by using an approved tabulation system as authorized by the city clerk, and will record the first choice votes cast for all ranked choice voting contests in the same manner as for contests determined by plurality.
I'm back on my nitpicking. Are we using will or shall?
Good question.
Because I noticed that before and then I forgot that I noticed it. But I think we've got shall and applicability, and then going forward it seems like will kind of takes over.
Does anyone who has more experience with contracts and ordinances know if there is my limited experience tells me that will and shall are pretty interchangeable, but I'm happy to make it consistent. Would you
I don't think
feel better if this is shall?
I looked it up and it quickly just now says, so I'll read it. As a general rule, use will for affirmative and negative sentences about the future.
Is that legally or just in everyday writing?
It's an English website, but you're right. Legal writing
does not necessarily have to do with the English language very much.
Correct. So short answer, I don't have an answer anymore.
I think it could be whichever way you want. Nobody's going to nitpick it that much.
This says shall is the most misused word in all of legal language.
Well, then we should pick a lane.
That's what I'm reading right now too. Legal writing. Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put will, and if the attorney doesn't like it, he'll change it to shall.
I think so. So here's what I think. I think will just refers to a future tense, like this is what they will do. But
after the close of polls,
a shall would be will and must, right?
Yeah.
That's my interpretation. But I'm not a lawyer. Anyway, we should figure that out.
So this thing says I recommend using will to create obligations.
Oh, I perceive it the opposite.
Well, that's just what this says. But it also says the effect of these words should be the same. The difference reflects only on the impact upon the reader. So,
I feel like I've never heard that said about legal language before.
yeah,
I feel like the lawyer's favorite things to do is nitpick the word the.
yeah, right.
I think it's fine.
So are we comfortable kind of leaving some wills and shalls in here and let
Yeah,
the
I think the
lawyer decide,
implication
or-
is, I think the implication is that the clerk has to use it, period. So, ranked choice voting. So whether or not we use will or shall is really a convenience to the reader. I think the solicitor will fix it if it's wrong.
All right.
Owen?
Yeah, what Chris just said.
Okay. All right. I'll leave these based on sort of readability for the time being, and
Fair enough.
I might ask a little note to the because then the ordinance automatically goes to the city lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so I might put a little note that just says, "Hey, we mentioned will or shall, and let us know if."
Okay, we don't have to waste any more oxygen on that.
Yeah, that's okay. Nitpicking is fine. This is the place to do it. Okay. If no candidate receives more than 50% of the first choice votes based on the election returns provided by the polling locations, an instant runoff must be conducted under the supervision of the city clerk in successive rounds. The instant runoff may be conducted by hand or by using an approved tabulation system as authorized by the city clerk.
This section would imply to me that we definitely need a definition for instant runoffs.
Oh,
And-
yes, absolutely. Yep.
And is there a situation in which a candidate can receive, which we could define more than 50% in two different ways? It seems like there might be a possibility of that.
For a single winner race?
By total ballots cast or by total votes for that candidate. I mean, maybe it's just
I would say
overkilling.
a votes cast.
First choice of votes cast based on the election returns.
Yeah, you're not going to count blanks.
Right,
Right,
like if
no,
you
that's
to
exactly
vote
my
for
point.
the-
You know, we should define that.
Does adding cast fix that, or does it need to be more explicit?
Go scroll back up, Dan.
Sorry. So right here, I'm looking at this part. If no candidate receives more than 50% of the first choice votes.
I feel like the words votes cast based all in a row is kind of creating some sort of intelligibility logjam. So I'm not exactly sure how.
What if you take out the first choice if you just put votes cast or something?
Oh, votes cast in the first round?
Well, you're not, at this point, you're not doing the ranking because you're just doing the regular.
Right, that's true.
You haven't even gotten to the ranking yet. It's just, I print my tapes. And
if no candidate receives more than 50% of the votes cast.
For that office, maybe just changing it to votes cast for that office, because really what I'm getting at is if you have 100 people casting ballots and 10 people leave mayor blank, then you have problems.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yep. Of the votes.
I'm feeling uneasy about removing first choice though. I don't know.
Owen, did you have a hand?
Well, yeah, I'm just sorry. I'm just computing this. So we're talking about the first round here, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with Sarah because the first round is basically almost like a non-ranked choice voting election, right? If someone gets 50% plus one, they win.
Yep.
So I think that, unless I was misunderstanding what you were saying, Sarah, that the use of first choice votes there is important.
Yeah, I think that it is because the first round happen slightly differently than subsequent rounds if they're required.
I would also suggest that first choice be replaced with highest ranked
Hmm.
to eliminate that problem.
All right, I'm gonna share. Oh, I changed. Oh, there we go. Share.
That's a good point, Chris.
All right, so do you see this? No candidate receives more than 50% of the highest ranked votes cast for that office based on the election returns provided by the polling locations.
This sentence is a disaster.
Would you say it's a disaster?
Yeah, it's not anybody's fault because it's technical, but it is.
Yeah, yeah,
It's the kind of sentence that people are gonna have to read 4 or 5 times.
yeah.
Do we need based on the election returns provided, or can we just end it cast for that office?
Probably.
Yeah. There's kind of a train wreck at the end of this clause. You're right.
I mean, Dan, isn't this canned language from
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. That part's unnecessary. If no candidate receives more than 50% of the highest ranked votes cast for that office. We've already talked about where the votes are coming from. That's solidly implied by the whole system. So I think that improves it. Okay. Go back to going behind my little window. Okay. All right. If software is used to perform the instant runoff, then the city clerk shall have the sole authority to specify the software configuration settings that are used to tabulate the results, provided that the chosen configuration settings are in compliance with all aspects of this ordinance. So this sentence was Tom and I's decision, like attempt to reconcile not making this software, making this ordinance software agnostic, while at the same time making it fit with like what we've decided based on the software settings, while at the same time putting as much authority for discretionary settings into the clerk's hands as possible. Because we identified a number of those settings do not affect the results. And so basically the clerk has the discretion for everything that is not specifically specified in this document. And you'll see that you know.
Yeah, Dan, I don't like this one at all.
Okay.
Because I don't think there should be any changes. I mean, I'm not going to do anything with the software settings. It's going to be how it's set by this committee and LHS, and it's not going to change. And I don't know why it would be that I would specify them. And I don't know how you would, what kind of summary would you put? I just don't understand that at all. I don't even know how I would do that.
That makes sense.
That whole number 3, I don't like it at all.
So the reasoning here is that software does get updates, and it's entirely possible that
but it's nothing to know about. It's something that, you know, the company, like I have no idea what the software looks like for our image casts or for our poll pads or anything like that. And I'm not gonna, that's something that the vendor would determine. And I mean, you don't know, right now the voters don't know what the software for our image cast, how it reads. I mean, I don't know why we would need this, because that's part of the software that we pay for that is developed.
Okay.
And it's not going to change. It's going to always be the same.
Okay. So I think another way of going about this is, you know, so this is an ad hoc committee, right? This isn't a permanent committee to deal with RCV. So you know, I do think we need some kind of mechanism for dealing with potential software changes. The other reasoning for this was that in our discussion about the profiles, there were a number of things that came up that we wanted the city clerk to have discretion over. For example, pauses in the real-time tabulation, or having that sort of the first round pause. Now, normally I would say, you know, let's not worry about that at all. Like, it's not even an issue. The reason it's an issue is that it is one of the settings in the profiles. So we have to kind of make a distinction between profile settings that can potentially change the result of the election. And that's kind of where the disclosure stuff here goes to. Now, I don't expect it to be your responsibility to write anything in terms of a summary. I feel like that's the committee's job to do.
So who would do that, though?
However, for things that affect the outcome, like how skipped votes are handled, et cetera, I think that needs to be transparently communicated, available to voters. So that was some of the thinking behind this as well. But I definitely hear you, and I think we can do better on this. I think we can.
Yeah,
I think that
software is, you know, I mean, if there's a button that pops up and it says, do you want to do this or that? But as far as software and any changes, I'm not going to touch any of it. Whatever it's
Right.
set at, that's what it's going to be. And I can't imagine that there's going to be clerks. I mean, I can't change the software.
right.
I just
So
don't
do
like
you
to read it all.
want to strike the first sentence, Barb?
I don't like the summary and the posting it on the website. I mean, that whole thing, I mean, maybe it needs to be described differently. I mean, I think
what Dan is saying is that there are settings, right? And they do, some of them change potentially outcomes, and people want to have confidence that they understand how votes are being tabulated. And that by publicizing this on the website, you know, maybe you don't go completely into the weeds with it, but you explain it in some way, then people can have confidence about what's happening with their vote. Is that what we're trying to do in this number? And
Yes.
I think
the
this
first
needs to be something that's provided by the, I mean, I just don't know who would write something like that.
This committee would write it.
Well,
It would
but
be-
when this committee doesn't exist anymore, you've got it in there that the clerk would do it. And
Right.
Well, presumably, if you edited something, you would.
So that's where I was sort of getting to the idea of this committee being an ad hoc committee. So we need to specify someone to have the authority to adjust these settings as needed going forward.
I think
In
whatever
the
it is,
absence of this committee. So if it's not the city clerk, which it does not have to be, we could either we could propose the idea of there being a permanent ranked choice voting board or committee, or we could designate that to the city council to make those choices.
so I guess I just don't even see the situation. Once we get the settings set and, you know, it is the way it is. I mean, I don't know why they would, I mean, why
Right.
they would
Court-
change.
Future court cases, future changes in software, future.
Which
I'll give-
the
I'll give-
vendor
I'll give you
would
an
have
example.
changed.
I'll give you an example, which is, let's say that the next version of the software comes out, or actually, here's a more concrete example. Let's say that question 2 passes, and that there's something specifically in that act that talks about how skipped votes are handled on a federal level, or sorry, on a state level. And let's say to comply with that act, Dominion updates a version of their software that distinguishes between the number of skipped votes on a particular ballot. And that software update gets rolled out because our state RCV elections have to be compliant with it. At that point, as a town for our city elections, we are faced with a choice that has to be made. I mean, it will by default remain the status quo, but there will be a new setting in the software, and someone needs the authority to determine how that setting is applied to the profile. And that's just one example. There's other things that could, I mean, another example is there's a giant security scandal with Dominion. Let's say there's election interference, hacking, something is insecure, right? And they file bankruptcy and a new vendor comes into play, right? They're gonna have new software and someone is going to have to determine what those settings are. And I'm totally fine with it not being the city clerk's job to do that. But somebody is gonna need to have the authority to do that.
Yeah. I see that and I understand that, but I think just the way you've got it written there makes it sound as if I'm going to go in and I'm going to like change all these configuration settings, which I don't understand anyway. And I'm going to, I mean, I think the idea that what you're talking about makes sense, but I think it needs to be much simpler explanation. Should stay, if software changes, you know, occur, then the city clerk shall have the authority to work with the software vendor to make adjustments or something. You know, I don't know.
I like the sound of that. I like the sound of that. Part of the rationale of this was based on our previous conversation about some of these settings that don't have an effect on the outcome of the race, and the desire to allow some discretion as to what those are. For example, to have a presentation to the clerk's office says, we want to have a profile specifically for broadcasting the results live, where there's these pauses put in. Oh, for that, we need to create a new settings profile. And it basically, what this would do is give the clerk's authority, the clerk's office, the authority to create that different profile for broadcasting. But
something like that wouldn't change anything. It would just be, I mean, I think there needs to
change the results, but it is part of the problem is it's lumped into a basket with these things that do affect the results. That's sort of the problem.
And it could be perceived as something that might change the results, even though it might not be, right? Because, you know, it could be used to throw some doubt on the outcome of the election. Oh, well, you changed this, that, and the other thing. Are you even allowed to do that? Who did that? Is that? I mean, people could make a lot of smoke about it.
So how about this for a suggestion? Rather than the clerk putting out a report or something to the public, what if every time the clerk makes a change to the standard settings that we've agreed on, they have to just make a report to the city council and seek their permission or approval? That way it goes in the public record. The city council has their chance to be like, that's messing up the spirit of the act, with the hope that the city council is also not trying to meddle with things. But what choice do we have?
I'm comfortable with that kind of authority structure. What that removes is any leeway for these profiles to be adjusted by the clerk's office based on for convenience or presentation.
Right, and I know that there's going to be updates that the software is, they're going to make updates to the software just to make it better, make it work. And I mean, I don't think every single time like the manufacturer or LHS does a update like that it,
I'm not sure we need to address the convenience issue, because if it doesn't affect how the votes are tabulated, then we don't need to know about it, the public at large.
Right.
But if it does,
maybe this paragraph needs something that talks about distinguishing settings that can potentially alter the result.
Yeah, for sure. And then if that's the case,
the limiting thing on that.
How would you do that?
I mean, I think you could just write a sentence.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant a limit on. Yes, I think that should be done, and I think that maybe it should go to city council, because I think that's a big question that any clerk shouldn't have to answer, nor should they want to answer that, because that's a lot of heat.
I mean, I would think it would just happen, except for routine updates in the software that the, company does. I can't really imagine that there would be any need to change what we do.
Most updates wouldn't, but I do foresee a situation where they add, a minority of updates that add a setting that could, based on it being set a different way,
Yeah.
change the outcome.
I think
And in
LHS
that
will
case-
definitely roll.
I mean,
things out.
they would have to notify us, if something like
yeah.
that was happening,
Sure.
and then we could maybe, then something could be posted. But
Right. Right.
unless they notified the clerk, I mean, I can't imagine anybody's going to want to fiddle around with anything, because all we
No,
want to do is
We'll
just
have
get the results.
I mean, things are going to change because, we don't all hoist buggies anymore. Things change.
Right. But I think most of the changes would be because of the software itself being changed and updated, and it just regular updates like your phone,
Right, but we are looking at the long-term goal here, which LHS might not exist in 10 years, and we
Correct.
have to account for that.
so I'm totally on board for the city council needing to approve those changes. I think that's a totally fine way of checking.
As long as there's time, but
Oh,
yeah,
as long,
so
of course.
I'd like to see that whole number 3 reworded, because I don't think that I don't like it,
Yep. And I think that is a good thing, because I think it'll make it more clear. So three here is actually, I think something I'd like to do is to split it into 2 paragraphs,
that,
because there's one that really applies to the configuration settings that have a potential to change the results. We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna define that. And then the separate thing is this transparency, which is so that is going to end up being a separate paragraph. And the rationale here is we as a committee are deciding what some of these settings are, and they do have an impact on the results, right? And so I think it's our duty as a city to communicate any of those decisions that do have the potential to affect the outcome to voters in plain English, all right?
Yep.
So not non-technically.
yes.
So for example, how overvotes happen, how undervotes happen, et cetera. These settings that we decide, is this true or false, this setting, and it can affect who wins, basically. Now we don't decide it after we have the results. We decide it before the results, but I think this is information that that needs to be accessible to the public. So that was me and Tom's thinking behind having a summary that is posted. Now that summary, in the way that this is listed, kind of implies that it would be the city clerk's responsibility, but I'm completely happy having it be having that not even be implied, and having that be a document created by this committee. And then if that, if anything like that needed to be changed, then the city council would have the authority to update that. But this wouldn't be something that the clerk's office has to try and explain. This would be something that this created, a separate document, an appendix to this, that this committee creates, decides on all the wording, and that's our to the public statement about what these settings are.
I mean, truthfully, if anything changes, you're going to have to change the ordinance.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah. So
Not necessarily, but there's many changes that might not need the ordinance. But if there are changes where we have to make a decision about a setting that affects the results, then yes, we would need to update the ordinance, or someone would need to update the ordinance. The city council would do that.
okay.
So do people on the committee feel I mean, is there agreement or disagreement about this idea, the second idea sort of a plain English summary of the consequential decisions that we've made?
I think that it's a good idea, but you know, if the clerk doesn't do this, and I know I'm stepping back a second. We do have the registrar of voters. I think that Barbara Craig is on that. Maybe we could task
Yep.
them in the ordinance with putting the summary out every election.
I somehow I doubt that Barbara would, and that they would. I don't think they're going to want to do that.
I don't think it needs this. This is something that needs to change every election. As Barbara said, this is
Correct.
This is pretty set in stone until such day as the city council needs to sort of decide on a major new setting software thing. You know, like I think this, and even then it would only be tweaked to account for that. You know, it wouldn't be, this isn't a per election rewrite. This is a one-time document. So I really think that we can do this. I mean, this is less than a page of writing that I think this is our job to do.
I think that summary is not maybe the right word. I think that might be slightly confusing, but okay. I do think that we need, I mean, I do think it is our responsibility to help people understand what happens when they vote. And, you know, respectfully, I do think that is important to get out, and it shouldn't matter whether one wants to do it or not. I think it must be done. So,
and to make a distinction, this isn't voter education. What this is a disclosure. So there's a little bit of overlap there, but this isn't how you fill out your ballot. This is the committee has decided about overvotes. You know, this is how your overvote will be handled. You know. Sorry, Owen. Oh, Owen, do I see your hand?
Yes, it glitched. It glitched just as you called on me.
Oh, okay.
I agree with everyone. And for you know, A, this creates transparency within government. B, it's like creating large print, small print. So yeah, that if someone cries foul of the results, it's very clearly spelled out to the public. No one could say, oh, I didn't know it worked that way. I also would comment, and Barb, don't kill me, but you know, potentially you could use terminology like the city clerk or their designee. So that way that creates some flexibility in terms of who actually, you know, ends up being responsible for this. But I definitely do think we need something somewhere for a variety of reasons, both in terms of being responsible for educating the residents of our city, as well as liability is not the right word, but so.
There's something that I am sort of equating this kind of idea of a disclosure to, which is sort of like the zero report that gets posted at the polls. You know, it's you know, it's something that not everybody looks at, but it's kind of this display of transparency of the system. And I know it's not quite exactly, it's not the same thing, but I kind of equate it in my mind in a spiritual way like that. I think Chris had their hand, and then Tom.
Yeah, so as we're all discussing this, it dawns on me that Barbara's worried about having to do this extra work every election. But at the same time, we're talking about it being a disclosure, and you only have to disclose changes. So Barbara is saying that she's not going to make any changes. So really what it comes down to is that there's not going to be any need for anything beyond the initial disclosure that this committee makes. And then as long as nothing changes, it doesn't matter. So this is only if something changes. So I would just put that out there, that not to worry too much about it.
I think that there's only work if something changes, and that work would fall on the city council or a committee that's created. But I do think that this is something that should be transparent information at any election where it's used.
Yeah, no, I mean, what we do now will be standing until there's a change.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
in which case the only work is that it gets taped up,
Yeah.
you know? Tom?
Okay, I think I might be wrong here, but I think we might be overthinking this a little bit. Because, okay, so first of all, this disclosure wouldn't change if none of the settings changed, but it would still get posted because there still should be something saying, if you rank 2 people for first place, we don't know which one to count as your first place, so we're not gonna count either.
Yep.
If you rank one person as first and one person as fifth and nothing in between, we don't know how to interpret that, so we'll count your first choice vote, but after that, like, we're not gonna count your fifth as your second. These are the things. I'm not saying that we'd be using like that language that informal, but I do think people need to know that, like, this is how we're going to interpret your votes, and that'll have to be posted every time there's an election, but it won't have to change.
It'll just be the same photocopy basically with a new date.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of
Oh, all right, keep going.
of what this says, it's saying that the city clerk shall have sole authority to specify the software configuration settings, provided the chosen configuration settings are in compliance with all aspects of this ordinance. So the only time that this would come up, I mean, Dan brought up the example of what would happen if, yeah, like they're currently they have a certain way of handling skipped rankings. The state ballot question suggests a different way of handling skipped rankings. If that day were to come, this ordinance would have to be revised, because we right now, if we decided that would be better, because as we have it right now, we have a pretty clear description of how we handle skipped rankings.
Right.
So at no point will that ever be the decision of the city clerk.
Right.
What might be the decision of the city clerk is, for example, if a city clerk, if Barbara or some future city clerk decided, oh, you know what, we think that the public would be really interested in seeing these results tabulated live. Well, that might mean changing the settings for how that data prints. And it won't affect the results, but it will be like, it will change sort of like just how that data gets visualized, whether that's in real time or whatever. I do think that that sort of information does not rise to the, it doesn't, maybe what we should do here, I'm sorry if I'm sort of just brainstorming. Maybe what we should do here is really specify that where we say, provided that the chosen configuration settings are in compliance with all aspects of this ordinance. Maybe we should swatch that out for something saying, provided that the settings do not change or have no potential of changing the result of the election.
I'm going to show you, I'm going to share my note screen here and highlight that.
Yeah, because we don't care if the voting machines are 90 degrees from the door, and we don't, we don't get into all that sort of stuff. We shouldn't get into this stuff either.
Right. Right.
And
so what I think just to mirror what Tom's saying and to confirm, one of the big things that we're going to do here is very succinctly clarify the difference between settings that are consequential to the results and ones that aren't.
And in my opinion, the only settings that need to be posted are settings that that actually change the results. And here I'll throw in one maybe new idea. In the case that either LHS comes up with a new setting, there's a new thing, hey, you need to decide whether you're doing this or not. Like, or say that we get a new vendor because LHS goes bankrupt, right? And we have somebody else and they say, again, I don't really foresee anything changing outside of
that kind of stuff happens. So,
but say we get blindsided by something and suddenly there needs to be a decision about how something like this changes. I do feel like at that point, that's a revision to this ordinance, and that's council territory. There's like, just because we didn't think about it here doesn't mean that that decision should fall to not just the city clerk, the executive branch. Like that's legislation.
Correct.
Like just pretty plain and simple in my opinion. So it should say like, you know, like these are the settings, and these are the settings that the city clerk has the ability to do whatever they want, provided they don't have to change anything, but they're allowed to change whatever they want, provided it doesn't change the election.
Right.
Anything that does change the election result, or anything that could change the election results, those settings need to be summarized. And then, you know, any change to this, any setting that would change, like requires a change to this ordinance.
Yeah. So I completely agree. I do want to kind of move on, but I think I, at least in my head, have a very good idea of how to rewrite this whole paragraph. And it's actually going to end up being 2 paragraphs. I think it's going to be almost entirely new language. And I think we have a pretty good overview of what that's going to be. We're going to be defining that the difference between that there are 2 categories of settings. The category that we're talking about is the ones that have the potential to change the results. And anyway, that like I really, and that any of those, you know, it's de facto the city council territory, and there might be something sort of explicit about that as well, just to make it clear. But before we move on, is there anything sort of that hasn't been addressed about this? I know, Barbara, you had your hand up, but I don't see it now, so maybe.
Well, I guess I just wonder, like you're talking about having something at the polls, and I mean, I would expect that it would just be kind of taking excerpts from the ordinance and posting that, because
Basically, yes, but it would be in plain English, so it would be written not by this committee. It would be written by this.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, especially that first election. I mean, yeah. So it would be nice to have help with that before this committee disbands.
Oh, that writing would be the job of this committee, and in fact, it would be an appendix to the ordinance. It would simply be part of the ordinance. So it would literally be printed out and posted. There would be no additional job for the city clerk, other than if the city council at some point updated that.
Right. I don't mind you make it sound like I don't want to do work, but I just.
No, you do more work than any of us already. So
it's just that in my head, I still don't understand a lot of this. And I'm just hoping that the software is going to do it all for me, and I don't have to, you know, so. It will.
But also this document that we write probably will help.
Right.
I mean, that's the goal of it. And I did some research on what plain English is as a theory, and like how it's written, and you're using not very technical words, targeted sort of to a particular lower grade level, to just kind of spell things out very, very clearly.
I will keep it forever, and I will photocopy it each time.
Exactly.
And Barb, I didn't mean to imply that you don't want to do the work. I don't think that you should have to take any extra burdens that you don't need to take. So
or don't feel comfortable making in terms of discretion.
I don't feel comfortable interpreting it myself. So there you go.
Yeah, which I think is the correct way that we should be going about this. So.
Okay.
All right. So we're gonna keep going here. So this kind of transitions to some of the nitty-gritty stuff in terms of settings, and we did try and make this very clear and concise. So. So in each round of the instant runoff, the number of votes for each continuing candidate must be counted. Each continuing ballot shall count as 1 vote for its highest ranked continuing candidate for that round. So this is just the basic We're in round 2 of counting. This is how each ballot counts. This is how you count each ballot. It's the highest ranked continuing candidate in that round. So this is kind of, I think of this as the one person, one vote paragraph. We're doing the runoff. This is how it's counted. In any round, and so now we're getting into that's the meat of it. It's very, very simple, but sort of the remainder of this is the edge cases. They're not super rare, so we have to talk about them. They happen all the time, but they're the asterisks, So in any round, if a voter has not ranked any continuing candidate, the ballot is exhausted for that contest. Ballots may be exhausted for other reasons, as described below. If a ballot is exhausted, then no subsequent candidate rankings marked on that ballot are counted for that contest. So this is if someone ranks 3 and then they stop, and we go into and all of those 3 candidates have been eliminated, then it is an exhausted ballot. And the software does this. The software does all of this work, and it will categorize it then as it'll assign that to a tally of exhausted ballots. And so then this goes into some of the specific situations that we talked about in terms of the settings. The following ballot situations shall be handled as follows. Overvotes. When a voter marks more than one candidate for the same ranking, then those rankings are ignored and the ballot is exhausted. So when someone ranks someone for 1, someone for 2, and then,
Should you have
they vote
something
2
in there?
people for 3.
Should
Go
you have
ahead.
something in there saying for that race? Because that almost makes it sound like the whole ballot is just done.
That's a good point. Yep. Well, it so addresses that in paragraph 5, but I see what you're saying, where we, instead of saying the ballot is, it's sort of referring to the ballot as the individual race, and then it's sort of.
I think there's nothing wrong with adding for that race. It only makes it clearer, and it's
Yep.
perfectly
Yep.
fine.
Yep. I totally agree. Add for that contest. Yeah, that's a good clarification, and I think that will apply to each of these, not just the one.
Mm-hmm.
Skipped rankings. When a voter does not mark, skips or leaves blank 1 or more consecutive rankings, then subsequent lower rankings are ignored and the ballot is exhausted. Duplicate rankings for the same candidate. When a voter marks more than one ranking for the same candidate, then the ballot will be counted for the highest ranking of that candidate. If a candidate with a duplicate ranking is defeated, then the vote for the next continuing candidate ranked by that voter will be counted in the next round. Now, this is an explanatory sentence that both Tom and I thought still deserved to sort of be here because it clarifies things. You don't really need that second part of this sentence because it's implied by everything else in the ordinance, as in you just go on to the next one. But it makes it clear, like if you rank somebody 1, 2, 3, and then you rank somebody else 4, your choices are pretty clear that it's first choice, and then your next preference is the one for 4. And that's basically what this says. All right. And then at the end of each round, if 2 or fewer candidates remain, then the candidate with the most votes in that round is declared the winner. So if you're down to 2, whoever has the most, they win and you stop. Otherwise, if more than 2 candidates remain, the last place candidate is defeated and a new round begins. Very simple.
So I think that, go ahead, Tom.
Should defeated be replaced with eliminated or something? I just, I
We
this
had up here continuing candidate means a candidate who has not been defeated.
Oh, okay, then that's fine.
So I mean, I think it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You know, it's.
All right.
I think that
Go down to
if
a defeat.
the otherwise statement we should consider adding it to the clause A, because they are otherwise is dependent on A. B is dependent on A. So it seems kind of weird, or at least put a semicolon after winner, something that implies that they're connected.
Ah, okay.
It's
I like the latter of doing it with a semicolon because I like them being separated out.
If you have a semicolon, you should not have otherwise. My pet peeve on semicolons.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You
You can
don't-
tell, you may be able to tell that I mean, if anyone has programmed before, like I really want to be able to write legal documents as if they're code.
Yeah.
But
The logic, I see the logic that you're doing. Yeah.
but you can't, like, it's awkward. I wish there's ways of doing that were accepted, but there aren't really. So, what do you think? Should I do semicolon? Should I combine it to a paragraph? Should I?
I think you could use semicolon and eliminate otherwise.
Well, so each of these subsections, A, B, C, D, depend on at the end of each round. So, right, at the end of each round, if 2 or few more candidates remain. So I think that you should just strike otherwise, and you can continue with if.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Because they're all sort of a dependent clause after that colon on the first one. So no semicolons. Just
There's
strike.
another. You'll see. There's another otherwise down at D2, and I will.
Yeah.
I'll remove that as well. And I'll reword that to make it fit. But I'm gonna agree. I see, like, yeah, it's sort of at the end of each round, if, yeah. Okay, so if there is a tie between last place candidates in any round, then the vote totals from the previous round are compared, and then the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated. Kind of using eliminated and defeated interchangeably, as you can see. If the candidates remain tied, this process repeats until one candidate has fewer votes or there are no more previous rounds. This was the setting that involved going back in previous rounds if there's a tie. And the order in which we go back in previous rounds. We don't go back to the first and work forward, we go back one by one. So then, you know, this is sort of moving further into the edge case of you go back all the way, you still can't break the tie. If there are no more previous rounds when breaking a tie, if the last place candidates have no mathematical possibility of winning, then all of them are eliminated at the same time. This is something the software does. That was our batch elimination tied only setting. So it is able to determine this, do people have mathematical chance of winning or not? And so for example, this is most likely to occur, well, obviously any of these tie breaks go back to the first round because you're working your way back through the rounds. You know, if there's a bunch of write-ins all with one vote, then this would result in all of them simply being eliminated at once, which is very nice. Although we haven't talked about write-ins, so that might even be dealt with first. Otherwise, so the otherwise here is we get back, we go all the way back to the first round, and you know, there are multiple people tied, at least 2 candidates tied, and one of them could mathematically win. Or either of them could, you know, because they have the same votes. Elimination must be decided by lot in accordance with the city charter. And the candidate chosen by lot is defeated. The result of a tie resolution decided by lot must be recorded and relied upon in the event of a recount. That's it. This is just a series of fallbacks, you know?
I do think that last otherwise is not clear, though, for a different reason. I think that I think you should say if one of the
Yeah. Yep.
candidates has a possibility, a mathematical possibility of winning, then elimination must be decided by lot.
Correct. Yep. I'm going to strike that otherwise and replace it with
Yeah, it's
what you
just
said.
So are you saying here, so say there's a tie and we have to do a drawing, I guess, correct?
Yep.
And then there's a drawing and the person that's chosen is the one that is gone?
That's what the city charter says.
Isn't it the person, I would think the person who was chosen would go on.
You would, but
Mhm.
the
Is
city
that what it
charter
says?
says, uses,
All
the
right.
city charter specifies this is how it, that, I totally agree. If I was just making this up, I would have said the chosen candidate is the winner, you know, of the round, but I did look into the charter and it says that whoever is chosen by lot is the one who's defeated, so kept it up.
Do we use the little metal tubes?
We can.
Yeah, those things are cool. Wait, you probably never witnessed the metal tubes.
That's
No,
how we
I
used to
think
pick the
not.
jurors. They would come and pick the jurors out with those.
Oh, wow.
They're these little metal tubes and they have little rolled up pieces of paper in them and they say,
Yep.
so the at-large race, they use them to determine.
Oh,
Cool.
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of them.
Maybe we should mandate them being used for something, just for fun. Like
But, like,
what color
what-
the ballots are.
Like, surprise, you're eliminated.
metal tubes. I have to settle this with metal tubes at dawn.
Tom.
It's like picking the black beans out, right?
Ooh, yeah. So that I don't think we need to specify how the lot is done because the charter has already talked about that. You know,
Okay.
this just references that this is the total fallback, and it's honestly very unlikely that this will ever happen. That there's a tie between mathematically
People could win.
viable candidates, but if there is, then we did a lot. So
Like
it's
if-
actually much more likely that there's a tie using plurality between, you know, if there's 3 people running, or 2 people running, it's much more likely that one of them will get a tie. Since we have all this other ranking information with RCV, we're relying on those rankings to break ties. And then it's only in the case that we can't that we have to do lots.
Is this the kind of thing that might happen actually in an earlier round, like the second round, when there's still more mathematical possibilities left?
Probably, yes. And if you think about it, this only happens when yes, it could be any round that we have to break ties, but the only time that you would draw lots is where there is no previous round to go back to. So if this happens in the 5th round, you're comparing votes in the 4th round between those 2 candidates, then the 3rd round, then the 2nd round, then the 1st round. If they're still tied and they're still mathematically viable, then you draw by lot, because there's really no other way to break it. So, all right. So I have a whole page of notes here, and me and up to 2 other members of the committee will go through and we will make all these changes. Okay, great. So I'm gonna since these are 2 agenda items, but they're not at all. They're pretty overlapping in theory. I'm gonna share this document, which is what our next steps look like for this ordinance. So, and we can talk about whether these are necessary or not, or et cetera. So one of the first thing on this list is details about results reporting. Data from all rounds reported and posted on the city website, including counts of exhausted ballots. Now you guys can see from the stuff Jeff sent that the software generates reports that already contain all this information. It's just in Excel cells. But it's even, there was even the abbreviated report that has columns of cells that show each round. Basically, the idea here is that instead of just the news of, hey, you know, Tom Peak won, we're saying the voters get the data from each round of the runoff, the results from each round of the runoff, which would just include how many votes each candidate got, whether they were eliminated, how many exhausted ballots there were. This would probably be a separate section, and it would be very general, just saying like, the city clerk will post the results and the results will include the tallies from each round.
Sounds good.
Great. That just needs to be written and will be written. So recounts. So this came up as the, you know, do we need to specify? I know there are currently, I think according to state law and maybe even the charter, thresholds that automatically trigger a recount if something is so close, is super close, or if candidates request a recount or can request a recount under a certain threshold.
I don't think so, but I think, you know, you have to go, there's a whole process for recounts. And
right.
I think since I have never done one, I think that should be looked at before there's any talk about it, because the state law and local probably takes precedence.
It certainly would. The only thing that we might need or want to address is how those thresholds apply to rounds. Since rounds are runoff elections, you know, we may just want to specify this doesn't, you know, this runoff threshold for a candidate requesting whatever doesn't just apply to the final round, it applies to each round of the runoff.
I'd want to run that kind of by the elections division to see what, you know,
right.
You know, because there is a process for it. And I even if it's earlier rounds, I think we have to keep in mind that there's state laws.
Okay. So here's a question: when just as you're running that by the election division, like here's a situation, like, again, we're probably talking edge cases here, but like, I just think it's relevant. So say that there is a race and it's a race between 3 people. And so one person is going to get eliminated in that first round. And then that sort of, one of the remaining 2 is going to be the winner. Now say that the like second and third place are very, very, very close. And that a person comes in and says, well, really, I want to recount because if in fact I shouldn't have been eliminated, if in fact the other, like the person that you put as second place should have been eliminated, then I could have won. Can we just rerun it with them as the winner and show that, like, actually it wouldn't have mattered even if you had made it this round, the votes from so-and-so would have all gone to your opponent, and thus there's no need for a recount because you had no chance of winning even if you survived that round. That's the sort of thing that I'm wondering, because otherwise just doing that could potentially eliminate
the need for a recount entirely.
And pointless recount in the future.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's an interesting thought. I mean, it's kind of wonky, but I kind of like the idea of it, because if it kicks in, it could save the city, and especially the clerk's office, doing a lot of work if it prevented the need for a recount, that would be a ton of work prevented.
What would that look like in practice?
It would need to be something that the software could do, though.
Yeah. It would probably be something that LHS would have to do.
Well, would you be able to go in manually and just say, like, in this round, say this person had won instead of this person, run it like that, and then just, I think that there must be something like that, because you have the ability to break ties. So there must be the ability to say, what if this person had won instead of this person?
Right. It would you'd sort of be creating a scratch data election that you can play with, and sort of, which is where that gets super complicated, and which is why maybe that's something that could be like delegated to LHS. It's something that's, I think, worth at the very least mentioning to Jeff and seeing if you know, it might be something I could see him saying, like, that's something we could do quite easily. It would just be a little bit of processing and you know.
Well, if I remember correctly, the software has the ability to export all the ballots for one, but I think it also batches them up in saying these are all the people that voted 1, 3, 2, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it would be easy enough to give all that data to a candidate who's requesting a recount and say, make sure you want to request a recount because you're going to look foolish if you do. I mean, this is the reality of it.
That's true. Yeah, without actually needing to do that yourself, kind of put that on the.
Right, especially and especially if it's batched up in a situation where there's only 3 candidates and you could probably tell right away. It sounds more complicated than it is, but you might be able to tell right away and say you're not going to, because that's egg on face for a candidate, and I don't know if they would want to do that.
Right.
Right, to create a whole process.
Right.
Well, so maybe we just need to, before we get too deep into the weeds on this, maybe we just need to figure out what the actual state and local guidelines are for recounts, and then that might clarify what questions we might have.
Yeah, that's already on my list, so we're gonna look into that. I want to jump back one sec to the details about result reporting. Do we want to specify that the cast vote records in a digital format are made public data? I mean, the machine spits that out. So this would just be a matter of like a file being made available, you know, of that data.
I think we definitely should have every bit of transparency that can be.
Right.
Because
So it's not showing individual ballots or how individual people voted, but the CVR shows, it's basically a record of how all those ballots.
Yeah, because one of the lures of ranked choice voting to me is to be able to say, like, is to be able to see, like, hey, the candidate who wanted to clean up the pond got all the second place votes of the candidate who wanted to keep the streets clean. You know, like these things, these are valuable data points that should be available.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're gonna do more research on recounts and revisit that. Voter education materials. This is something that the committee could decide, nope, this is not in the scope of the ordinance, so leave it off, or we could decide, nope, this is gonna be specified. So our thoughts here were notification to voters before the first or perhaps the first several RCV elections, via mailing or via posting, possibility of a RCV voting guide available at polls, which is also written in plain English. Also potentially an insert with mail-in ballots, since mail-in ballots are now totally exploding. And
remember, mail-in ballots do not continue past the end of December. This is
right. Yep.
Only absentees for a city election.
As of now.
No,
as of now. Yeah. So whatever this would be, as either an initial notification to voters or something that's sort of available at this isn't the disclosure on how the settings affect the election. This is a very and it's probably a little bit more in detail than whatever would go onto the ballot itself as a heading. You know, currently on the ballot it says, you know, fill in the oval next to your choice. You know, it's between the two. But it would be something that would be written by this committee. It would, I mean, I'm sure it would be limited to either a single or a double-sided page, and it would be a plain English with diagrams with, with graphics, how to do this, what is this and how do I do it? And what does some of the wrong things look like? And there's a lot of reference material for what that looks like elsewhere. I'm in favor of this kind of thing. I think that it would be good to do. I think it would be good to be an appendix on here. Again, it would be kind of like the disclosure. It would be a document that's part of this ordinance, that's written by and approved by this committee. It literally just, it's a PDF, it's done. It just needs photocopying. Whether that's sent to voters, whether that's available at the polls, et cetera, like whether it's posted online, it's a done deal.
One thing you better remember though is if you're going to be doing anything that requires mailing or printing, that's got to be part of the budget that that you've been that's voter education, and don't forget about it.
Right, absolutely. Yep. I'm still trying to get a good answer out of Jeff. I mean, obviously this is election season, so LHS is slammed. So, and I understand that, but so slightly on the back burner for that is, since they handle our census.
So yeah, speaking about that, I did hear from our census guy about that.
Oh, good. Oh, okay.
So it's my personal opinion that to send it out on January 1st, 2021 is way too early.
Premature. Yeah.
It's too early. People are going to just throw it away. It's going to be a waste of money. I think it needs to be much closer to the election.
I agree.
I mean, not that they couldn't do a mailing. We would have to pay for it, of course. But I think it would just, it's going to cost money, and I don't think it's going to be effective that far out. And
I'm inclined to agree. I think timeliness is
too far out.
Yep.
Especially this year. There's way too much going on.
Yep. So from experience, I know that it's possible to send something to every address in the city using the Postal Service for somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000. That's not a letter. That's a flat, kind of like political mail, but it obviously would be official city mail. It would be indicated as such, and we might be able to, we might be able to do that as a nonprofit. We may not, but for something like that, that's the ballpark, $4,000 to $5,000. That includes printing. There may be other ways of doing it because I'm not an expert at it. I'm just an amateur at that. But I do think that is something worthwhile. Obviously, if it was like a big postcard kind of thing, it would have to be potentially designed a little bit differently than just a document, an insert document. But I'm not so much worried about the content. I have a lot of faith in this committee to generate that material. And to make it something that we all feel good about and looks good and reads good. It's more about the logistics of that. So that might end up being sort of a budget request. I tend to agree with Barbara that the timing of it matters, and to do it with the census is, while convenient, probably not good timing. And so I'd be less likely to want to do it that way. Okay. So there's a gap in our existing stuff about write-in votes. So language and ordinance to address the exclude unresolved write-ins configuration setting. So Tom and I realized getting to the end of this that was a consequential setting that we had not addressed in the ordinance. Essentially, our understanding of that is write-ins are treated sort of as a single candidate called write-in. And unless there are enough of those for a write-in, assuming they were all for the same person, could that person mathematically win? Only then would they be resolved as individual names, which is kind of a nice way of processing them, because most of the time write-ins can't mathematically win. So I think we do need to add a little bit of language to either as a separate section or one of the existing sections about that, because we realized it hadn't been addressed. And the last thing on here we already talked about, which is what I'm now sort of calling a disclosure, but is a summary page. And again, I made note that would be something that would be an appendix to this ordinance, so that it's just ready to go. Does anyone have anything to add to this or any comments before we I know this has been kind of a long meeting, so I'm, cognizant that we should be wrapping up soon, but this is a good time to jump in with any additions or changes or anything that anyone thinks of.
I'd like to thank you guys for this incredible amount of work that you've done. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. It's not, I mean, honestly, this was all a few hours of work. It wasn't like
Still
full-time crazy.
And a few years of amassing the relevant knowledge.
That's true. Yeah. Has been both Tom and I have probably been, Tom longer than me has been involved in this state campaign for 3 years, 4 years. It's been a while.
4 in January.
Wow.
I got to be over in January, so one way or another, I won't get to 4.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, who knows? There'll be stuff of the legislature, maybe. Hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully we won't have to do three elections the way Maine has.
Yeah.
Headed, so. All right, cool. In that case, we will bring more material back to the committee as a whole. If anyone is interested in working offline on any of this stuff, I'm going to be sharing stuff as it comes about. But if anyone has a desire to generate or participate in any of that, just let me know and we will make it happen. Any 2 of us can meet, or even 3 of us can meet and work on this kind of the way Tom and I did some editing on the ordinance together. I think it's good for writing to do that solo and then to do editing in a group. It just seems more efficient. All right. I don't think there's anything else on the agenda. All we have to do is pick a new next meeting date. So I think we are potentially looking at October 8th, 15th, or 20th.
I cannot do the 8th.
Okay. How's the 15th look for people? October 15th.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
Just 1 second. Yep, works for me.
Okay. Cool.
I should be able to make that work, yeah.
What time? 6?
6. Yep. All right. So we will say next meeting is October 15th, which is a Thursday, 6 p.m. Probably still going to be on Zoom, unless we hear otherwise.
I'm confident all our problems will be over by October 15th.
Ah, I like your confidence, but I don't share it. All right. Thank you, everyone, for doing this long meeting. And I appreciate all of your input, which has been very, I really like this committee. I feel like everyone is very engaged in the details and willing to sort of hash them out in a nice civil way. So I really do like that.
We're a good bunch of nerds.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And the next 2 months are going to be really interesting in terms of our non-primary elections. So Barbara, you I hope you had a nice break after the previous nightmare. But it was the first time that I had worked on doing the processing of stuff, and it was actually really interesting, that process. So if any of you other people are interested, are at all curious about that, I would encourage you to sign up with the city as a poll worker, because it's really, it's very brief duration, but it's really cool. I mean, it's just to see how the whole thing works and how everything's processed. So, cool. I think we are adjourning the meeting. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? I'm not going to do roll call on this because it's really silly. But anyone opposed or abstaining from adjourning?
No.
All right, meeting is adjourned. We can stop recording.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone has a nice evening, and we'll talk to you soon.
You
Okay.
too.
Thank
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.